Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to something that on paper should be fairly boring, but a topic that I personally find kind of interesting, which is the history and use cases of basic attacks in Tactics Ogre. So we're going to be going over kind of the role that this particular action has taken on over the course of the series, as well as talking about how to properly utilize these things in Reborn, because it's one of these cases of a tool like any other. Basically, a tool that has changed its overall shape over the course of decades, and yeah, that's kind of interesting to me. So let's go ahead and get started. So first thing to realize, as always, is that Tactics Ogre has always reinvented itself over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So every time that it's done so, the rules have been different. At the end of the day, the series has always been an adaptive story with a different rule set every time that it came out, and that's no accident, because they want people to experience the story in a new way. And so in this particular case, if we go back to the classic version, we'll see that the rules were roughly as follows. That there were basically next to no skills on any one of these characters, being a situation where they were they were basically just a pile of stats that went to go hit something with an item of some description. They had 4 item slots, and they could smack things with a shield, with a sword, whatever else. But ultimately, it was kind of a stats v stats thing. There weren't really too many skills. There were some spells, there were some abilities on monster units, but it was fairly basic. There were some tactics involved in terms of, like, let's say using throwing stones on a boss to go leech experience off them so that you have enough stats to hurt them all of a sudden. You know, you want to try to keep some distance with your weaker units. Keeping people alive might be a little bit of a thing. Sometimes your rookies will just get absolutely blown to smithereens the second they look at somebody funny. But it's a case where, again, at the end of the day, it was an old RPG. There was a lot of emphasis on stats. However, the funny part about this is that this is one of those things that oftentimes is, again, misremembered, because it's not that everybody necessarily always has a counter at all times. Like, you'll notice right here, he is going to attack a friendly, sure. Funnily enough, there was a rule added later where lawful units will not counterattack friendlies, but whatever, that wasn't in yet. But what we see here is that he has a chance to counterattack, but due to a stats mismatch, he has absolutely no shot whatsoever of actually hitting Denim here. However, on the flip side, if you wanted to not risk that 2% chance, you could just point-blank range somebody in the face for usually more damage than you were meleeing anyway. The purpose of melee attacks in this one was usually not for the purpose of directly attacking something unless you had a major stats advantage, but rather more as a threat. So, in theory, you'll notice, the reason I bring this up is because you'll notice that the combat system adapted to specifically adapt to this kind of engagement that we're looking at right here, more so than you'd think. Because the original mentality of the melee thing was just like, that guy is there holding up his shield, holding up his sword, he is there as a threat. Somebody attacks him, he attacks back, his turn comes around, he kills that guy. Basically, the first to attack dies, and then the ranged attacks do the actual heavy lifting. That's sort of the mentality of what was going on here, and that's pretty cool in premise. Also, being completely unable to do anything about this is kind of a glaring loophole in that particular thing, as well as wizards just being able to spam from a distance is a little bit of a whoopsie. But either way, yeah, melee units were pretty heavily underserved in this one, but when it came to basic attacks, melee was the threat, ranged was the action. Okay? So they wanted to redo this, which is why they redid the entire class system so that you didn't have to worry about your melee guys falling off the handle when we got to PSP. So let's move on to the second. So one random job interview later, let's go ahead and get going here. So, continuing on. So this is going to be the PSP version, and essentially the purpose of the melee attack, or the standard attack, or whatever else, changed entirely to just be the cannon at this point. So effectively, it's just going to be the thing that you blast out to do most of your numbers in this particular instance. Your skills are primarily there for the purpose of boosting that particular type of attack, and for the most part, your damage in almost all circumstances is going to be coming from that standard attack. Skills, again, will primarily just be there to boost it. Finishers will be there to potentially give you one-shot kills in certain circumstances, and you have certain instances where also you'll be You'll be using them for debuffs, but for the most part, it was just whatever did the most damage at any given time, and you would achieve these numbers by stacking various rankables. So essentially, every character, if you looked over at their skills here, would have a combination of different ranks. So their weapon rank that went up every time they used it, their racial rank every time a relevant race was used in that, as well as several passives that would end up multiplying it on top of it. This created sort of a two-part system. For one thing, you had saving rolls that were introduced to the system for the purpose of things like deflecting away attacks, like in this case he can deflect away arrows with his axe. With a few little complications here, the reason that this is relevant is because deflect and parry only apply to basic attacks. So this means that they cannot block finishers or anything along those lines. They are primarily just there to make it so the basic attacks can't hit you, because again, basic attacks are the primary threat here. And the end result of all of this stuff is that, yeah, oftentimes it became the first one to get a sort of like effective breakthrough of sorts. In a lot of situations, what you'd end up seeing is that one character would be able to vastly threaten another, while the other one really couldn't necessarily do a whole lot to them. So this tended to lead to a lot of value for things like archers and things like warriors and whatnot, as well as especially White Knights, Knight Commander, all of that sort of thing, where if they were capable of a one-shot kill, they were typically seen as more valuable than anybody else. And again, this was especially true for archers, since in their particular case, due to funkiness in the range formula, as soon as they ended up getting past a certain point, they became a comical threat versus everything. So, for example, like right here, she does not have a racial bonus versus this lizard, but she does have a racial bonus versus this guy. You can see how much of a difference that makes. They're not the same class, but it's notable, and she is not exactly kind of scraping the top of the pile there either. She has her bows up, sure. Anatomy's only at rank 2, Strengthen is only at rank 2 out of 4, and she doesn't even have an elemental augment on her weapon. But once you get all of those online, it's just over. It is just straight up over. So, with that being said, again, this is why oftentimes it's seen in Reborn that these weapons are, that they're essentially seen as weak, or essentially being seen, these attacks rather, not these weapons, are essentially seen as weak, or, like, why are they not doing as much as they should be, quote unquote. But as you can see, the role of the primary attack has changed in multiple different instances. It went from a threat action to then being the primary attack action, and what we see in Reborn is essentially that we are finally meeting there in the middle. So let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick. Okie dokie. So, what was the point of all that whole history lesson over there? Well, the point was that when it comes to Reborn, it's kind of right there in the middle of everything, where your physical attack is essentially an active threat that you hold out in front of you, but also its purpose is largely to be a sort of free attack if you were to counterattack. You aren't intended to go use your primary attack as your main means of doing stuff, but as a setup action. What do I mean by this? Well, if we take a look at, let's say, Mr. Zapan over here, right? His basic attack with these claws, if we want to take a look at this recovery time over here, is going to cost him 32 recovery time. So that's 30 ticks of the in-game counter in order to go and take another action on top of whatever he was doing. And this is on the somewhat higher end. As weapons get bigger and fancier, that recovery time continues creeping up and up and up. But what doesn't is your finishing moves, which are always going to be 15, 20, 25, 30 down here. Essentially going up slightly, changing slightly, but these are going to function more like Pokemon-esque kind of counter moves. So for example, like if you ever watched a Pokemon tournament, they're like, wow, they taught Thunderbolt to a Nidoking, are they dumb? No, they were trying to get coverage for water and flying. Essentially, there's different elements that are going to have different weaknesses, and if they can exploit those weaknesses, oftentimes it will be better than their primary attacks. So, like, let's say this guy is being attacked by a ice guy, which is pretty likely, considering that he himself is air and therefore weak to ice. This allows him to punish that particular unit, meaning if he picks up, let's say, physical card, critical card, something like that, he's going to stand a pretty decent chance of just one-shotting the guy using this particular move. And this kind of counterplay is useful for finishers, but then where does that leave our primary attacks here? This is a neutral attack, it's not doing very much, it's going to take twice as much time to swing this thing as it would the finisher, so what is its purpose? Why do I exist? Says the cat claw. Well, its purpose is there as a skill modifier, and this can mean something very different for each different unit type. One little thing that I want to throw out there just as a little bit of a detail that isn't super relevant to anything else right now is that physical and ranged attacks are going to have very different formulas, with physical being closer to those aforementioned finishers, whereas the, let's say, ranged formula is a decent bit more chaotic. The reason that this is relevant is because those attacks will then be useful in different situations. So like if there's a defense exploitation to be had, ranged attacks are going to be insanely good at that, whereas a physical attack, might be more useful in a more general purpose sense, more of an opening attack, as it were. But let's go ahead and talk about a few functions of that physical attack that are not exactly exclusive to it, but something that it can exploit particularly well. So in this case, when it comes to skill multiplication, essentially what we see is that any physical skill that you have will be able to multiply using this particular attack type. However, you'll notice before that swing, we had 38 MP, and now we're up to 66. That's because taking a physical attack or delivering a physical attack generates MP for all sides. It's essentially kind of a adrenaline meter. So this is actually a feature brought in from PSP, wherein the tactical point system used to be how you would generate skill points. In this case, because MP and TP are merged, this means that you can essentially generate points for finishers as well as spells using your physical attacks. Like if you've ever seen somebody, let's say, going and throwing out a physical attack against their own guys with like a cudgel or something, that would be why, because they knew that they would be able to generate some additional MP at a time that the fight was relatively safe. But this essentially means that you shouldn't just be looking to do physical attacks all the time, you should be looking to utilize them properly. So like a regular physical attack by itself, it's not going to really change the fight much. However, if you position a unit in the right spot, to the point that they're going to be counterattacking with, let's say, poisoned claws, that poison by itself will likely do a lot more damage than potentially just going and attacking regularly would have. Potentially setting up your attacks ahead of time might be a lot more worthwhile than necessarily going for that attack right now. The point is that when it comes to that attack type, you want to try and use them somewhat sparingly, somewhat cautiously, because, again, they cost a lot more than many realize. It's oftentimes slowing people down more than they potentially realize. But if, let's say, you've set yourself up in a position where, let's say, your attacks are primarily going to be, in this case, counterattacks with cat claws, I'm not necessarily too worried about going and doing those attacks by myself. Sure, the increased damage would be nice. I'm only getting 25% damage on this counter, but at the same time, I'm setting up my berserks a lot faster. I wait for that berserk to come up, I wait for that right opportunity, and then we just go ahead and smack both these two out of the way. And then I guess we can go ahead and pick up this one, because why not? This is a hilariously good spawn right now. And you can essentially take advantage of a lot of different scenarios going like this. You can repeatedly take advantage of these little openings by taking these faster actions. If I had just gone and attacked this guy normally, that would generate a little MP for both sides, but it opens up the other guy for counterattacking you with something a bit stronger. So essentially, what you want to be doing is, again, taking advantage of these different opportunities. So like right here, I know that this guy's probably going to attack right away. He might take a Mighty Strike, but I'm just going to go ahead and throw him in right there. I probably should have just taken that the Mighty Strike was going to prevent that counter, but whatever. The point is, I want to try to put him in a position where he will hopefully be able to sweep both these guys pretty comfortably. And in this particular case, hell, I mean, if you're going to throw it out there, I might as well just take it. Okay, I didn't pay attention that he wasn't berserked. Oh well, he was just sanguined. So the Berserker is going to be a case of somebody that does, take that physical attack and does extend its overall function pretty insanely well, as we see here. And like in this case, they're more or less able to quickly sweep past most things that they come across. But the use cases for this extend a lot more than just a basic attack and counterattack and whatever else. They oftentimes can extend the overall value of a class overall. It may extend the overall functions of what that particular unit can do. So like, let's say the basic attack in the hands of that Terenius, as we saw right there, essentially put out that active threat like we saw back in the SNES version, where it's like, okay, if you attack me, I counterattack you with Fear plus Breach. And that's potentially a really good setup. The weapon itself might be be expensive to swing, but hell, if something goes and attacks that guy, they're going to be attacking anyway. You might as well set it up ahead of time, and there you go. You saved yourself some time on that swing. You still got that breach off. You can have your longbows go finish off that guy whose defenses just got annihilated. It's a good time overall, right? But let's say somebody like the warrior might potentially see this and along with their guaranteed critical attack and think, okay, this allows me to take this critical function and use it as a guaranteed pushback. This might be, in the right circumstances, a guaranteed kill. Same thing for the tremendous shot over on the archer, wherein it is oftentimes going to be a guaranteed kill. The AI will oftentimes purposely not bring steadfast in order to give you those opportunities. In the case of the berserker, they more or less say, hey, if I roll both my skills at the same time, I'm functionally speaking throwing out finishers in a neutral element every single round. Try and stop me. And sure, it ends up functioning pretty darn well under most circumstances. It's especially useful for cases of a solo run. Now, this isn't really meant to be a solo run right now. This is the level 0 challenge, which basically means no experience, which means that this guy is by far the strongest thing on the team, and I am just trying to turn him into a sword master. It's a surprisingly difficult process. Yes, this run has been paused since last year for the stupid class mark, I kid you not. Anyway, sorry, that's beyond the point. Moving on. So, the main kind of takeaway from all of this is that when it comes to your basic attack, it generates MP, it has the option to combine with pretty much any skill on your list, meaning that it's got a lot of options to push things around and to potentially multiply itself, but you don't want to necessarily be seeing it as your primary thing that you're doing. Even an elemental weapon might be slightly better against certain elements. It's never going to be as strong as a finisher in its base state. Essentially, in many ways, the basic melee attack is sort of the Magikarp of your actions. It's going to be expensive, it's going to take you a while, but if you load it up with the right skills, it is going to be devastating. If you try to use it in its base state, it's going to disappoint you every time. And this applies to basically all attack types in the game. Like, for example, even when you get up to double attacking and things like that, it seems like something that would be a ginormous threat, until you start realizing, it's essentially going to take you twice the amount of time to go take that particular action. They're weighing down themselves with additional equipment, they're taking additional recovery time per attack. What's the use case of something like that? Well, it needs to be able to insta-kill something. So let's say taking advantage of a breach while also, let's say, steel stanced or something like that. Yeah, it's like a melee kind of version of a ranged attack or something. It could potentially work. Something like a dagger in one hand, katana in the other does give you a potentially stronger primary melee attack, while also giving you the means to, let's say, utilize two different finisher sets at the same time. Could potentially be exactly the tool that you need. Again, everything just comes down to being another tool, another thing in your toolbox, another thing to potentially think about. Like in this particular case, he is only slightly getting a bonus versus this particular unit, because this finisher does not have any bonus versus this lady, but he himself does. So we can just go ahead and use this as a quicker action in order to try and keep up with that ninja over there, and take advantage of this card over here, which I suppose will help in the long run. Now, he could have gone to take down that physical card, but that would have put him in a compromised position going forward, because those Terenites are going to be a bit of a major problem. However, if he leaves himself next to this ninja, they will almost certainly attack, and he can go ahead and kill it off with poison, because as we see, there's nothing really that's going to be able to do much healing on this particular map. However, this guy also resists that particular finisher, so instead we might potentially go for something like this, and then wait for the poison to finish him off. So we'll go ahead and take one of those, and then we'll move over this way, using the trees to try to block the incoming health steals coming in from those Terenites. They have both their terrifying impacts and their health steals set up, meaning that we want to try and set up for a one-shot at long range, if at all possible. So right now we'll take some additional spells from those, kind of saw that coming. That guy's going to go ahead and die from his, everything there, so that's going to be its own thing. But at any rate, hopefully this helps to explain at least some of what we're seeing here. Obviously, there's a lot of things to think about, and this is definitely not a usual kind of situation. Essentially, when it comes to Tor, it likes to try and play itself a lot like a card game, but in a more active sense. A bit more of like an action-focused Metal Gear Acid, I suppose. Which means that a lot of these things are going to want to be thought about on the fly and whatnot. which means it may not always necessarily translate directly as something that makes sense compared with something like an FFT or a Disgaea or whatever else. But again, your primary melee attack is just a free attack that generates MP. It's a free attack that can attach a lot of things to it. Its unique function is the amount of attachments that it can use, because it has never been higher than this version. Like, you've never been able to, let's say, combine Vigorous as well as like Terrifying Impact like you can in this one. You've never been able to combine Slayer skills along with double attacking skills or anything along those lines. So this is the most open that the system has ever been, full stop, and yeah, you should try to take advantage of that. Anyway, so I gotta get going. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Thank you for stopping by, and yeah, I will see you in the next one. I hope this was helpful for you, and y'all take care now.